There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. This is a special episode because it's a part of our series called Content-Based Networking, where we're really talking about content collaboration. The category that we're trying to build, content-based networking, it really focuses on leveraging content collaboration with your ideal clients, potential referral partners, industry influencers, and really anybody that you want to reverse engineer relationships with. I believe strongly, and we believe as a company, that the best way to do that is to collaborate with those people, create content with them, make them look like a rock star, because I just think it's a fast path to genuine relationship building. Scott Ingram is joining me today. Scott, how are you doing today, man?
I'm great, James. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. So Scott is an account director at Relationship One. He's also the host of two podcasts. He's the host of Inspired Marketing, and he's also the host of Sales Success Stories. So Scott, I wanted to talk to you today because you sent me an email shortly after you found out that we were starting to build this category of content-based networking. And you mentioned that you had just gone through an exercise where you created a book. And I thought, man, I want to have you on, dive into the process of how you did that. But first, I want to kind of start with your why. So you've got two different podcasts, and there are two different goals with both of those shows. Can you walk us through first, kind of what is the goal with Inspired Marketing? What are some of the results that you've seen from the relationships you've been able to create with your collaborators there, your guests on that show? And then we'll talk about Sales Success Stories and your goals there and the results that you've seen on that side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the connecting theme is kind of this idea of inspiration and real world stories from real practitioners. So Inspired Marketing, in my day job with Relationship One, I'm an account director where I manage relationships with, we're a professional services firm. So all of our clients are Oracle Marketing Cloud clients, and we provide a lot of different services and development things around that. So Inspired Marketing is interviews with practitioners who are actively using Oracle Marketing Cloud solutions. And typically we're focused on one particular project or initiative and how they're finding success. So a couple of things come out of that. One, we've got just amazing content to share with our other clients, because a lot of times that story that they're sharing, that challenge that they've overcome, is something that another client is trying to solve for. So there's a lot of cross-reference that happens there, but it is also a huge business development tool for us. Not all of the folks that we've had on the podcast are our clients. It's probably a 50-50 mix. And of those who weren't clients when they came on the show, frequently become clients afterwards, just because of the relational touch points that happen over the course of having a podcast. Because if you think about it, it's all about them, right? I'm trying to feature them and make them look good. And there's a prep conversation. And as you know, James, the magic in these conversations happens before and after you turn on the recording. Totally. And then there's hey, we launched it and it's live and the company's sharing it and we're really excited about this, and it's just a pretty natural evolution in the way that conversation goes. So that's that show. Sales Success Stories is really my own passion project. I have been in sales for a long time, and I've consumed so much content over time in an effort to improve myself, and that's an ongoing thing. And so much of the content in the sales space comes from quote unquote sales experts who really haven't sold anything but themselves in typically decades. And I wanted to, I feel like sales is evolving, especially in the prospecting side of the world. What are the people at the top of the game doing right now? So my criteria for that show is they are either number one or at least in the top 1% in a very large organization, and they are quota carrying individual contributors. So typically these folks aren't seeking the limelight, right? They don't have another agenda, but there's a lot of willingness to give back and make a contribution to the sales community and share their stories. And we go super deep. Those episodes on average are north of 75 minutes. So it's a pretty deep dive.
So, and you actually talked about that show and on another episode, we had you on B2B Growth a while back, episode 257. The episode's title is The Secret Sauce of Today's Top Sales Performers. And so if you want to go back and listen to that, you're going to hear Scott share some details, some things that he's learned from doing those interviews. I love the concept of that, Scott. I think talking to did you say it was number one or number two top performing rep at a company is kind of the qualification for someone to be on your show?
So number one or top 1%. So if there's 300 sellers in an organization, sure, I'll settle for number two or number three.
I love it. So Scott, now that listeners have a little bit of context, you've got two different shows, two different goals, both of which are, they're mapping to different things, but things that you're reverse engineering the results that you want. And with Sales Success Stories, you recently took 19 of the guests that you've had on the show, and you essentially collaborated with them to create a book. But there are a few steps in between that. Can you walk us through kind of the journey? And one, I guess, why did you want to create a book? And then how did you go about executing it?
Yeah, so the why is pretty fun. I was getting ready for an interview. I was in Las Vegas for a conference and happened to find a guy who was the top seller at a medical device company in Vegas. And we were getting together and I kind of walked him through the background of the show and the why. And we talked about the books we were reading. And I said, I do this because there aren't any books by top salespeople. And he said, Scott, the reason top salespeople don't write books, we don't have time. We're too busy selling. And at that point, I said, you know what? If enough of us got together to collaborate on a project like this, it would create a situation where many hands make light work, and we could actually do this. So after our first ever Sales Success Summit that we hosted here in Austin last May, I brought together a subset of a lot of the folks that were presenting at that summit. So they'd all been on the podcast, and we'd been building this relationship. And I put this idea in front of them. I said, look, I want to do this book project. And I asked them two questions. The first was, where's the gap in the marketplace, right? We are all reading a lot of sales books. I want to do a Me Too book. And then what's kind of the title and the overarching theme that we can put this together under? And they were so fast. The answers came quick and furious. And clearly I was too close to it to see the obvious answers. The first part was, Scott, there's not enough content from real practitioners. So just getting our stories out there is going to be super relevant. And you already have this brand with the podcast. Why don't you call the book Sales Success Story? Because that's what it should be. We'll all contribute stories. And so that is the title of the book. It's called Sales Success Stories. And the subtitle is 60 stories from 20 top 1% sales professionals. So that's how it came together. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how are we going to organize this thing and how's this all going to go together? And ultimately we just decided, look, just write. I'll figure out how to organize it after the fact. And I got kind of lucky there because the organization was pretty straightforward and easy. And it came together into four pretty broad sections that encapsulated it all.
And Scott, you mentioned something there with the Sales Success Summit that I don't want to downplay, because I think you've just done an exceptional job of leveraging the relationships that you're creating through the podcast. And then you're bringing them to these in-person relationships by inviting those guests to come speak at an in-person event. I think we could do an entirely different episode just on what all it took for you to pull off an in-person event and the power of the relationships that you had created digitally from your podcast to be able to do that. But I want to at least call that out here because I think that was so smart what you did. But the idea that you then had them on the show, you asked some of them to speak at this event, then you kind of host this kind of conversation, this kind of mastermind style conversation to go, okay, how can we create this book? You ultimately decide we just everyone shares is going to share their stories. They're going to write those down themselves. They're going to submit it to you. I'm sure you edited, fine-tuned the process, and now you have this end result of a book, but you've also got really in-depth and developed relationships with these 19 other people that you've collaborated with. Can you speak to, have there been any advantages of you having those relationships with those co-collaborators? And also tell us about kind of what have been some of the results from the book since you guys have finished it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, this is a very, very selfish project, right? I'm able to share and give back to the community in a really big way as part of the project. But at the end of the day, I carry a bag myself, right? I have a $3 million quota, and this is about me getting better. So these have all become my mentors, and I have sounding boards in so many different areas. So it's funny, I just had a fan of the podcast reach out. Now he's going to have to come onto the show because he closed a $38 million deal for his company. It was 8 times his annual quota, 7-figure commission check because of it all. And the first thing he did, he signed up for the next Sales Success Summit. And so we got on the phone. I'm like, okay, what is this? What did you do? What happened? And he's like, you know what? I decided to become a student of sales, and I've never missed an episode of your podcast. And what he said that I loved is he said, steel sharpens steel. And that's so much about what this is, right? It's building these types of relationships. Now, had I reached out cold to these folks, I don't know that I would have gotten much traction. But because I'm able to reach out to them and offer them something of massive value, and one of the ways I describe this to them a lot of times is this is mentoring at scale, right? They have all had the conversation that we have on the podcast dozens, maybe hundreds of times, right? There's so many people in their organization that are reaching out to them asking for this advice. I'm like, look, have this conversation with me one time, and now you can refer them to that interview and sort of skip that first level, ground level basics of what you've done and how you've accomplished what you've accomplished. And then you can also sort of separate those who are really committed. Like, okay, you spent the time, you actually listened to the full episode. Now you can ask really smart, pointed follow-up questions. And it just creates a much more productive sort of setup. So everybody just kind of wins in this situation. And again, for me, selfishly, I was actually worried, especially through the book project. I was flogging these people. I mean, if you can imagine trying to herd 19 top performers. These are very, very busy individuals. And I was making a pretty big ask of them, right? Not only did I ask them to write this stuff, and of course we had professional editors and stuff that cleaned that up. But then I went back again and said, okay, now I want you to record it in your own voice, because when we did the audiobook, it is all 20 of these individuals recording their own stories, right? So I felt like, am I going to erode these relationships by making all of these asks? But you know what? At the end of the day, with the result, when I shipped each of them a case of these books and they're a star of an audiobook, they're loving it. The feedback that they've given me is just absolutely through the roof. So it has solidified the relationships more than anything I could even imagine.
Yeah, it's such a natural cadence for how a relationship develops, because relationships develop over time because of the number of interactions you have with someone. When you think about your best friends, the reason you're best friends is because you've had a lot of time together. In college, I just think a lot of my friendships from college were born because I was either in the same fraternity with them, or we were involved in the same ministry together. We were in situations where we spent a lot of time together. And essentially what you're doing with something like the book is you're creating an instance where there's going to be a lot of time spent with one another. The process of doing the podcast interview, the process of hanging out with them at the in-person event that you invited them to speak at, the mastermind call that you guys did to figure out the structure of the book and kind of the why behind the book and what you wanted to accomplish with it. Then all the back and forth on fine-tuning the content. So it makes sense that now you've got really solid relationships with these folks. They would probably bend over backwards to help you in whatever way they could moving forward, because you've delivered tangible value to them. Scott, can you speak a little bit to kind of some of the process that went into creating a physical book? How did you go about getting that done? And then also creating the Audible book. Was that a really lengthy process? Did you outsource it? What did that look like?
Yeah, so lots and lots of resources. This is actually my second rodeo. So, and I'll share a different model, James. We didn't even talk about this in our prep, but the first book I did was called Making Rain with Events. And what I did a little bit differently there, and at the time I was working for a SaaS company in the event marketing technology space, and that book I outlined and I assigned chapters. So not the story structure, but sort of a chapter structure. And a lot of the folks you probably know, right? Matt Hines contributed that to that book from Hines Marketing, and Brian Carden, who was the CMO at Eloqua and the CMO at Lattice Engines. I think he's at Fuse now.
Fuse now.
Yeah. So a lot of great stuff. So I sort of had the team in place from that. There were so the first piece is everybody misses at least one deadline through the process. So you just have to, it's a big project management sort of task, right? And you have to know where the hard deadlines are, where the soft deadlines are, know that you're going to be doing a lot of follow-up and asking people and just reminding them and helping them through the process. But once we got the raw content in, went through 2 rounds of professional editing. Obviously, we had the cover design done. And then once everything was assembled, I have a really incredible inside out designer. So he did all of the inside design. He also helps me with what's called the technical layout. So when you go to the printer or you go to KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing, there's all kinds of specifications in terms of how everything needs to be formatted. So you want to have experts and professionals helping with that stuff. Had I done all of this stuff myself, I would still be working on this book, and I probably wouldn't be selling as much as I'm selling. It would consume my life. So there's tons of resources out there. You just have to do some networking and kind of find those elements. And then the audiobook was a lot of fun. And I had the resources for that because I produced these other 2 podcasts. So I was actually able to use the same editor. He had some experience with ACX, which is the Audible kind of process for getting your audiobook submitted. So he was familiar with how that worked, what those specifications were. So, we put the details out for them. I created sort of scripts for everybody to read and little intro stuff around their stories so that it was cohesive in the way that we put that together. And then you use the people, you use the resources to pull it all together, and it all worked. And the results have been fantastic. I was just looking today. I mean, the book's not even a week old as we're recording this conversation. The audiobook is selling the other formats 10-1, which makes sense. I have a podcast audience, right? So people are wanting to listen to this content primarily, and that's the best. I mean, you're getting the voice, you're hearing the humans behind these stories, and it's so powerful. It's been so much fun, and the reception and the reviews have been off the charts. I'm so proud of what we were able to pull together.
That's phenomenal. Scott, I want to dig a little bit deeper into, so you found the person that does kind of the inside out, layout design for the books, the book cover design. Were you using sites like Upwork, or like this was just through your personal network? I'd love for you to speak into the process of finding the talent to be able to take over some of those types of activities, because I know that can stop a lot of people in their tracks.
Yeah, a combination. So definitely some networking and some prior experience folks that I'd worked with on the previous book. I've also had really good luck in sourcing providers through Fiverr over time. I find that you have to go through kind of 2 or 3 different providers to kind of find those who are really good. But I've had really, really good success with that over time.
I love it. Scott, this has been fantastic. We need to do another episode just to talk about your in-person event and what all went in to making that a reality. But the reason we started doing this content-based networking series is to hear stories like yours and really get people thinking creatively about how they can just different ways that they can collaborate with people to create content, because podcasts are not the only way to do it. I love that you first had people on your show and then figured out, man, we can create more content together. And so you took on this book project. It's delivered phenomenal results for you so far, and the book's only been out for a week. So what I love so much about the book that I'm in the process of writing right now about content-based networking is just, this is an asset you're going to have forever. This is something you guys are going to have forever, that every all 20 of you are going to be able to say you're the author of a book. Like that's a title that never goes away. And so I really appreciate you sharing kind of the nuts and bolts of how you pulled this off, Scott. I think you got really, you shared some tactics that I hadn't considered before. So I really appreciate it. If somebody wants to, find the book, I just found it on the Audible app is where I found it and added it to my wish list. But if folks want to find your podcast, they want to find the physical book, where can they find the book and your shows as well?
Yeah, I'll give you one place, and I think they can get to everything from there. So if you go to top1.fm, the number one, TOP, the number 1.fm/book, that'll have links to all the places that you can get the book. If you do that relatively quickly, there's a bonus offer on that page. And then that's also the same site for the podcast and the Sales Success Summit and everything else. So you should be able to kind of surf around from there, from that book page, and find details about everything else.
Love it. So top the number 1.fm/book, and they'll be able to get everywhere from there. Scott, thank you so much again for your time. This has been incredibly helpful, and I really appreciate it, man.
My pleasure, James. Keep doing what you're doing. Great stuff.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency at no cost. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.